In this video, we'll talk about using StatCrunch to get correlation coefficients, simple linear regression lines, and do some interpretation. I have loaded the public school data that we used in Assignment 1. Once again, variables include the enrollment at the schools, the student-teacher ratio, per pupil spending, MCAST English, Math, and Science scores, some SAT scores, and finally a graduation rate. So suppose we wanted to explore some correlations. We would go under Stat, Summary Stat, and then pick Correlation. Suppose we wanted to see the correlation between the total enrollment, the student-teacher ratio, per pupil spending, MCAS English, and perhaps the graduation rate. So we would select those variables and then we would hit Calculate. To move this table to a Word document, we would do Options and Copy. I've opened a Word document, right-click, Paste. Suppose my interest is in finding out which of the studied variables are highly correlated with MCAST English. What about enrollment, student-teacher ratio, per pupil spending, and here we have MCAST English and graduation rate. So I've highlighted the 4 correlation coefficients, and here are some conclusions that we can draw. So if I look at the 4 numbers that I've highlighted on the table that talk about the correlation with MCAST English, the highest is graduation rate at 0.82. I'd say that graduation is moderately, strongly, positively correlated with MCAS English because it is close to 1. In other words, the higher the graduation rate, the better the scores on MCAST English. Per pupil spending is almost 0 at negative 0.02. So there's practically no correlation between the per pupil spending and how well students do on their MCAST English. It's kind of interesting. Student-teacher ratio is only 0.12, which is close to 0, so there's a very weak positive relationship. So as the student-teacher ratio increases, there's a slight but very slight increase in MCAST English scores. Enrollment, quite interestingly, is negatively correlated, but it is still a very weak correlation because it is close to 0. Apparently, the higher the enrollment, the lower the MCAST English scores are. If we wanted to, we could pull up a scatter diagram. We could go under Graphics and pick Scatter Plot. And let's pick what have we got here? Let's pick graduation rate as our X variable and MCAST English as our Y variable. And let's just create that graph. So we see this upward trend that indicates a strong positive association as the graduation rate goes up. So does the MCAST English. If we wanted to, we could copy this and then we could paste it into our Word document with that left click paste. Finally, let's look for some regression analysis. Under Stat, we're going to pick Regression and Simple Linear. Let's let our X variable be graduation rate and our Y variable be MCAST English. We're not testing hypotheses yet. We would like to save the residuals and save the fitted values. and we would like to plot the fitted line and finally to calculate. What I'm going to do is Options, and I'm going to do Copy, go to my Word document, right-click Paste. Now, the majority of this output is not of interest to us. We are going to erase all this business about dependent and independent variable. We are interested in the regression equation, and we are interested in R squared, but none of the rest of this has any interest, so we're going to delete it. So of that output, we really just care about the regression equation, and we care about R squared. I want to focus on interpreting the slope. The slope of this equation is 0.84. What does that mean in English? It's the change in the x variable compared to the change in the y variable. So the x variable is graduation rate and the y variable is MCAST English. So as the graduation increases by 1%, so a 1% increase in the graduation rate should translate into about a 0.84 point increase in the average MCAST score, MCAST English score. R squared was 0.64, so our independent variable graduation rate explains 64% of the variability in the school's average MCAST score. If we want to use the equation for predictions, suppose we wanted to predict the average MCAST English score for a school with an 88% graduation rate. So I'm going to simply substitute 88 into the regression equation, and if a school has an 88% graduation rate, we would expect that school to have an average MCAST English score of about 84.6. If we go back to the dialog box that displayed the simple linear regression analysis, you'll notice there's a next at the bottom of that. Let's click next, and there we have the fitted line superimposed on the scatter diagram. I want to look at points that are far away from the line. I want the ones with the highest positive residual and the lowest residual. For the highest residual, I'm debating between this point and this point. So let's click and put, we're going to left click and put a little pink box around this one and a little pink box around this one. And then we're going to go back to our StatCrunch, and we're going to try to identify those two schools. One is Millis High School, and that's school number 71, and the other is Lowell High School at 125. So the residual for Lowell is 21, and the residual for Millis is 15. So it would appear that Lowell has the highest positive residual. So we want to make note of this. Lowell has the highest positive residual, namely 21.2. Interpreting that, Lowell's MCAST English score is 21.2 points higher than schools with similar graduation rates. In fact, Lowell's graduation rate is only 21.5%, so it is doing exceptionally well given its low graduation rate. Would like to go back now and look for the school system that has the most negative residual. That would be the point that is furthest from the line but below the line. And it seems to me this would be the school. I Left click and drag a pink box around it. Let's minimize this and track this down. It appears that it's Quincy High School. And if I go over to my column of residuals, I see that it has a residual of negative 20.3. We'd like to interpret this. Quincy High School has a negative residual of 20.3, which means its MCAS score is 20.3 points lower than schools with similar graduation rates. Quincy's graduation rate is actually 83.9%, so it should be doing a lot better on the MCAS English exam.